You wake up at 5 a.m., before the world stirs, before anyone demands anything from you. You've been doing this for years, showing up early, staying late, carrying the weight that others won't touch. Your hands are calloused, your mind sharp from solving problems no one else sees coming. Yet somehow, every month when you check your account, the numbers mock you. They whisper that your dedication means nothing, that your sleepless nights and weekend sacrifices are just expensive hobbies in a game you don't understand. You watch others, people who seem to work half as hard, who leave at 5 sharp, who never volunteer for the difficult projects, and they drive better cars, live in better neighborhoods, take vacations you can only dream about. The math doesn't add up. The promise you were sold that hard work equals success feels like a cruel joke played on the earnest, the dedicated, the morally driven. You believed that sweat equity was real equity. You believed that being indispensable made you valuable. But indispensable often just means trapped. The exhaustion isn't just physical anymore. It's psychological. It's the bone-deep weariness that comes from realizing you might be playing by rules that were designed to keep you exactly where you are. You start questioning everything, your choices, your values, your understanding of how the world actually works. The people around you offer comfort through cliches. Your time will come. Hard work always pays off. Good things happen to good people. But these words feel hollow because you're starting to suspect that being good and working hard might be exactly what's keeping you from the life you want. This is where most people retreat into bitterness or double down on the same failing strategy. But you're about to discover something different, something that will crack open your understanding of work, value, and power itself. The cage you've been living in isn't made of circumstances, it's made of beliefs. And beliefs can be shattered. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this coming over a century ago. He watched societies build elaborate moral systems around labor, turning work into a virtue and suffering into a badge of honor. But Nietzsche understood something that most people miss. The hardest workers often earn the least because they've been convinced that their moral superiority is payment enough. They've been taught to find meaning in struggle itself rather than in results. Nietzsche called this slave morality, a value system that glorifies endurance, self-sacrifice, and quiet suffering, while the powerful accumulate wealth and influence through entirely different means. The slaves comfort themselves by believing their suffering makes them virtuous, that their poverty makes them pure, that their exhaustion proves their worth. Meanwhile, the masters understand that power flows to those who control systems, not to those who serve them most faithfully. This isn't about good versus evil. This is about understanding the game you're actually playing. You've been operating under the assumption that dedication and moral behavior will naturally lead to material success. But what if that assumption is not just wrong? What if it's deliberately designed to keep you producing value for others while never accumulating it for yourself? The hardest workers often earn the least because they've confused effort with strategy, moral behavior with economic understanding, and being needed with being valued. They work within systems designed by others, following rules they didn't create, toward goals that serve interests beyond their own. Their dedication becomes their prison because they never step back far enough to see the architecture of their exploitation. The psychological revelation here is brutal but liberating. Your work ethic isn't the problem. Your strategic thinking is. You've been solving the wrong equation entirely. You've been optimizing for virtue when the system rewards leverage. You've been playing checkers while others play chess. The system you're trapped in operates on a simple principle: keep the most dedicated people working the hardest for the least compensation by convincing them that this arrangement is somehow virtuous. It starts in childhood with participation trophies and gold stars for effort. It continues in school, where you're taught that following instructions and working hard will lead to success. It culminates in a workplace where your loyalty is expected, your extra hours are assumed, and your financial struggles are attributed to personal failing rather than systemic design. You've been conditioned to believe that asking for more money makes you greedy, that negotiating aggressively makes you difficult, that prioritizing your own interests makes you selfish. Meanwhile, those who understand the actual rules are accumulating wealth by controlling scarcity, leveraging other people's labor, and positioning themselves as indispensable decision makers rather than indispensable workers. The architecture of exploitation is elegant in its simplicity. Take the most ethical, hardworking people and convince them that their virtue lies in how much they give, rather than how much they receive. Teach them to find identity in their work output rather than their strategic position. Make them believe that financial success corrupts moral character, so they'll avoid pursuing it aggressively. Then, while they're busy being good employees, good citizens, and good people, extract maximum value from their efforts while paying them just enough to survive. And stay motivated. The system doesn't work despite your dedication, it works because of it. Your reliability makes you predictable. Your work ethic makes you exploitable. Your moral compass makes you manageable. You've become a renewable resource in someone else's wealth generation machine, and you've been taught to feel proud of this role. The psychological shift required here is profound. You have to stop seeing your dedication as inherently valuable and start seeing it as a tool that can be strategically deployed or strategically withheld. You have to stop finding identity in how hard you work and start finding identity in how effectively you position yourself. You have to stop believing that being good automatically leads to doing well. But that's where the illusion dies. That's where your real education begins. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power offers a different framework entirely. Instead of seeing power as something external, to be earned through moral behavior, see it as an internal force to be developed and expressed. Power isn't granted by others as a reward for good behavior. Power is taken by those who understand how to accumulate and wield it. In economic terms, this means understanding that wealth flows to those who control the conditions under which value is created and distributed, not to those who create the most value. The hardest workers often produce the most value but capture the least of it because they don't control the systems through which that value flows. They're optimizing for the wrong variables entirely. The will to power in your economic life means developing the internal sovereignty to define your own value, rather than accepting others' definitions. It means understanding that your financial success is not a moral reflection, but a strategic outcome. It means being willing to be uncomfortable, unpopular, or misunderstood if that's what positioning yourself advantageously requires. This isn't about becoming ruthless or abandoning your ethics. This is about understanding that effectiveness and morality are separate dimensions. You can maintain your ethical standards while becoming strategically sophisticated. You can continue producing excellent work while refusing to be systematically undervalued for it. You can be both good and powerful, but only if you stop believing that being good automatically makes you powerful. The psychological transformation involves releasing your attachment to being seen as virtuous through your work and developing attachment to being effective in your outcomes. It means caring less about whether others approve of your financial aspiration and caring more about whether you're building sustainable wealth. It means measuring your worth by your strategic position rather than your effort output. Power flows to those who understand its true nature, and its true nature has nothing to do with deserving it. The most profound power you can develop is the ability to detach your identity from your work output while maintaining excellence in execution. This psychological separation is what allows you to make strategic decisions rather than emotional ones. When your ego isn't tied to every project, every hour worked, every sacrifice made, you can evaluate opportunities objectively and position yourself advantageously. Silence becomes your ally here. Stop announcing your efforts. Stop seeking validation for your dedication. Stop making your struggles visible to others. The most powerful moves happen quietly, in the space between what others see and what actually matters. When you're not performing your work ethic for an audience, you can focus on strategic positioning instead of impressive displays. Strategic detachment means working excellently without working desperately. It means being reliable without being exploitable. It means caring about outcomes without being emotionally invested in recognition. This detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the psychological space you need to see systems objectively and identify leverage points others miss. You start noticing things differently when you're not emotionally invested in being seen as the hardest worker. You notice who makes decisions versus who implements them. You notice who controls resources versus who uses them. You notice who sets prices versus who accepts them. You notice that the game you thought you were playing where effort determines Reward is actually a different game entirely, where strategic position determines everything. The silence you develop isn't absence of engagement, it's presence without reaction. It's the psychological authority that comes from knowing your value independent of others' recognition. It's the internal sovereignty that allows you to make moves based on strategic calculation rather than emotional impulse. It's the power that comes from being unpredictable rather than reliable, mysterious rather than transparent, strategic rather than simply hardworking. Silence isn't absence, it's authority, and authority is what you've been giving away every time you performed your dedication for others' approval. Nietzsche's insight in Beyond Good and Evil is that moral categories often obscure, rather than clarify the actual dynamics of power and success. When you judge economic strategies through moral lenses, you blind yourself to how wealth actually moves and accumulates. The question isn't whether a strategy is good or evil, the question is whether it's effective. This doesn't mean abandoning your ethics. This means recognizing that wealth creation operates in a different dimension than moral behavior. You can be ethical in your treatment of others while being amoral in your strategic thinking. You can maintain your personal integrity while developing economic sophistication. You can be both good and wealthy, but only if you stop using moral thinking to evaluate economic strategies. The psychological breakthrough involves accepting that financial success often requires thinking that transcends traditional moral categories. Not becoming immoral, but becoming strategically sophisticated. Not abandoning your values, but refusing to let those values limit your understanding of how systems actually work. Not becoming evil, but moving beyond the simplistic good-evil binary that keeps most people trapped in ineffective strategies. You start seeing that the people who accumulate wealth aren't necessarily better or worse than you. Morally, they are just operating with clearer understanding of economic realities. They don't confuse effort with results. They don't confuse being busy with being productive. They don't confuse moral behavior with strategic behavior. They understand that wealth flows according to principles that have nothing to do with who deserves it most. This clarity allows you to engage with economic realities as they actually exist rather than as you wish they existed. You can maintain your ethical standards in your personal relationships while developing economic strategies based on what actually works rather than what feels morally comfortable. You can be both principled and powerful, but only if you're willing to think clearly about the difference between the two. The moment you stop judging financial strategies through moral categories is the moment you begin to see how money actually moves. And once you see it, you can position yourself within its flow rather than outside of it. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, the person who creates their own values, rather than accepting inherited ones, applies directly to how you approach economic success. Instead of accepting society's definitions of your worth, you develop internal metrics that align with your actual power and potential. Instead of waiting for others to recognize your value, you create systems that generate value independent of others' approval. The Übermensch approach to wealth creation means understanding that you are not a victim of economic systems, you are a potential creator of them. You are not limited to existing job categories, salary ranges, or career paths. You are not bound by others' definitions of what's possible for someone with your background, education, or current position. You are capable of creating unique value propositions that transcend traditional categories entirely. This psychological shift requires enormous internal strength because it means taking full responsibility for your economic outcomes rather than blaming systems, circumstances, or other people. It means acknowledging that if you're not where you want to be financially, it's because you haven't yet developed the strategic sophistication to get there. It means accepting that your current position reflects your current understanding, not your ultimate potential. The Übermensch approach involves developing the psychological strength to demand appropriate compensation for your value rather than accepting whatever is offered. It means being willing to be uncomfortable, to negotiate aggressively, to walk away from opportunities that don't serve your strategic interests. It means developing internal metrics of success that don't depend on others' approval or recognition. You start creating rather than just producing. You start controlling rather than just participating. You start defining rather than just accepting. You move from being someone who works within systems to someone who understands how to create and modify systems for your own benefit. You weren't weak. You were wired to believe that weakness was virtue. But now you're rewiring yourself entirely. You now understand that the hardest workers often earn the least because they've been playing a game designed to extract their value while providing just enough compensation to keep them engaged. But you're no longer playing that game. You're playing a different game entirely, one where strategic thinking matters more than moral posturing, where economic understanding matters more than work ethic, where positioning matters more than effort. This doesn't mean you stop working hard. This means you work strategically. You maintain excellence while developing leverage. You continue producing value while ensuring you capture appropriate portions of that value. You remain ethical while becoming economically sophisticated. You stay principled while becoming powerful. The psychological transformation is complete when you realize that your financial destiny is not determined by how hard you work, how good you are, or how much you sacrifice. It's determined by how clearly you understand the systems within which you operate and how strategically you position yourself within those systems. It's determined by your willingness to transcend moral categories when evaluating economic strategies and your courage to demand what you're worth rather than accepting what you're offered. You develop the internal clarity to see economic relationships as they actually exist rather than as you've been taught they should exist. You develop the emotional control to make strategic decisions rather than reactive ones. You develop the psychological strength to create your own definitions of success rather than accepting others' definitions. This is your economic awakening. This is where you stop being a victim of systems and start being a creator of them. This is where you realize that the hardest workers earn the least not because the system is broken, but because they never understood what game they were actually playing. Now you understand. Now you're ready to play a different game entirely. Now you're ready to win. You've been playing by their rules for so long. You've forgotten you could write your own. Every morning you wake up and ask yourself what you're worth to them, what price they'll put on your time, what value they'll assign to your effort. But that question itself is the cage. That question is the chain around your neck, and you've been polishing it, calling it career advancement. The exhaustion you feel isn't from working too hard. It's from working within a framework that was never designed for your flourishing. You've been trying to prove your worth using metrics that were created to keep you small, to keep you dependent, to keep you asking permission for what you already possess. The system doesn't want you to realize your own power because the moment you do, the moment you stop accepting their definitions of value, the entire game changes. Nietzsche saw this trap coming more than a century ago. He watched as humanity surrendered its will to create meaning to external authorities, to social systems, to the herd's consensus on what matters. He called the one who breaks free from this the Übermensch, not a Superman in the comic book sense, but someone who becomes their own authority, who creates their own values, who refuses to let others define their worth. But here's what most people miss about Nietzsche's vision. The Übermensch isn't born, they're forged. They're created through the conscious rejection of imposed values and the deliberate construction of internal metrics of success. This isn't philosophy for the sake of intellectual masturbation. This is practical psychology for economic transformation. You've been conditioned to believe that your value is determined by external validation, by the salary they offer you, by the position they give you, by the approval they grant you. But that's where the illusion dies. Your value exists independent of their recognition of it. Your worth is not a negotiation, it's a declaration. The shift begins when you stop asking, what am I worth to them? And start declaring, what I create is worth this. Not because the market says so, not because they agree, because you have developed the internal authority to set the terms. This is the difference between a wage slave and a value creator. The wage slave accepts the price. The value creator sets it. Most people are terrified of this responsibility because it means they can no longer hide behind external validation. They can no longer blame the system for undervaluing them, while secretly accepting that undervaluation as truth. When you become your own authority on value, you must also become responsible for creating that value. And that requires you to see yourself clearly, your unique combination of skills, perspective, and potential without the distortion of their limiting beliefs. The techniques for this transformation are deceptively simple, but psychologically demanding. First, you must audit your current metrics of success. What are you measuring? Who created those measurements? Why do you accept them as valid? Most people discover they're using metrics designed to keep them dependent. Metrics that measure compliance rather than creation. Metrics that reward conformity rather than innovation. Then you must develop internal metrics that align with your actual power, not what you hope to become, but what you already are when freed from their limitations. What problems do you solve that others cannot? What perspectives do you bring that are genuinely unique? What outcomes do you create that wouldn't exist without you? These aren't resume bullet points, these are the raw materials of value creation. The psychological strength to demand appropriate compensation comes from this internal clarity. When you know your value isn't dependent on their recognition, their rejection loses its power over you. When you understand that you create worth rather than hoping to receive it, you stop negotiating from a position of scarcity. You stop accepting less because you fear not getting anything. This is where most people break. They understand the concept intellectually, but cannot embody it emotionally. They still carry the deep programming that their worth must be validated by external authority. They still believe, at the core level, that they must prove themselves worthy of what they desire. But the Übermensch approach requires you to reverse this entirely. You don't prove your worth, you declare it. You don't earn value, you create it. The market will resist this at first. Systems designed to extract maximum value from minimum compensation don't want participants who understand their own worth. They want grateful employees, not sovereign creators. They want people who accept what's offered, not people who set the terms. Your refusal to play by their rules threatens the entire structure. But that resistance is confirmation that you're on the right path. When they push back against your pricing, when they question your worth, when they try to make you feel unreasonable for demanding what you create, that's when you know you've stopped being their wage slave and started being your own authority. The transformation from wage slave to value creator isn't a career change, it's an identity change. It's the difference between hoping someone will recognize your worth and knowing that your worth exists independent of their recognition. It's the difference between accepting their definitions of value and creating your own. It's the difference between asking permission and giving yourself authority. This is your declaration of economic independence, not from systems entirely, but from the psychological dependency that keeps you small within those systems. You don't need their permission to know your worth. You don't need their validation to create value. You need only the courage to become your own authority and the discipline to act from that authority consistently. The Übermensch isn't coming to save you from economic mediocrity. The Übermensch is what you become when you stop waiting for salvation and start creating your own terms. You've reached the end of something, not just this exploration, but the end of accepting economic mediocrity as your fate. The exhaustion you feel isn't from working harder, it's from working within constraints that were never meant to contain what you're capable of becoming. You've been excellent at their game while secretly knowing you could create an entirely different game altogether. This is the moment where everything converges, where philosophical understanding meets practical action, where the clarity you've gained about your worth transforms into the systems that generate that worth, where you stop being excellent within their framework and start being masterful within your own. The synthesis begins with a paradox. You must become impeccable at their game, while simultaneously transcending it. This isn't about rebelling against excellence, it's about redirecting excellence toward your own objectives. You maintain the discipline, the precision, the commitment to quality that makes you valuable, but you no longer limit these qualities to their vision of what you should accomplish. Strategic thinking emerges from this dual consciousness. You're operating on two levels simultaneously, delivering what they expect while building what you require. This isn't deception, it's evolution. You're not hiding your development. You're simply not asking permission for it. Every skill you master in their service becomes a tool in your own arsenal. Every connection you make in their network becomes a node in your own web of influence. But here's where most people falter. They think strategic thinking means constant calculation, endless planning, perpetual optimization. That's not strategy, that's anxiety disguised as productivity. True strategic thinking is rooted in silence. in the space between their expectations and your responses, in the pause before you reveal your capabilities, in the choice to remain undefined until you decide to define yourself. Silence becomes your most powerful negotiation tool because it forces others to fill the void with their assumptions, their projections, their fears. When you don't immediately respond to their offers, they begin to wonder if the offer is adequate. When you don't rush to explain your worth, they begin to assign their own estimations of your value. When you don't react to their pressure tactics, they begin to question whether their tactics have any power over you. This isn't about playing games, it's about recognizing the game that's already being played and choosing your moves consciously instead of reactively. Every interaction is a negotiation. Every conversation is a positioning opportunity. Every silence is a statement about your comfort with your own power. Unpredictability amplifies this effect, not erratic behavior, but strategic variance in your responses. Sometimes you say yes immediately. Sometimes you consider for days. Sometimes you counter their offers. Sometimes you decline without explanation. This pattern of unpredictability keeps them from developing a script for managing you. It forces them to engage with you as an individual rather than as a category. The psychological key is maintaining emotional detachment. Throughout this process, you're not angry at their attempts to lowball you, you're simply uninterested in accepting inadequate compensation. You're not frustrated by their delays, you're building other opportunities while they deliberate. You're not invested in their approval, you're committed to your own standards. This detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the difference between needing their validation and simply preferring their cooperation. It's the difference between hoping they'll see your worth and knowing your worth exists independent of their perception. It's the difference between asking for what you want and stating what you require. The systems you build must reflect this clarity. Time for money exchanges are the economics of slavery, elegant slavery, perhaps, but slavery nonetheless. Your time is finite, your energy is finite, but your ability to create value can be infinite if you build systems that generate worth beyond your direct input. This might mean creating intellectual property that pays you repeatedly. It might mean building relationships that refer opportunities to you. It might mean developing skills that command premium pricing. It might mean structuring deals that give you equity rather than just salary. The specific mechanism matters less than the principle. Your worth must be able to grow independent of your hours. The psychological mastery comes from maintaining this long-term perspective. While excelling in short-term performance, you deliver exceptional work today not because you're grateful for the opportunity, but because exceptional work is the foundation of exceptional leverage. You're not performing for their approval, you're building evidence of your capability. This evidence accumulates, not just in their perception, but in your own self-concept. Every project you complete with excellence becomes proof of your competence. Every challenge you navigate becomes proof of your resilience. Every result you deliver becomes proof of your value. This isn't about ego, it's about data. Concrete, undeniable data about what you can accomplish. The final transformation is internal. You stop seeing yourself as someone who has a job and start seeing yourself as someone who creates value. You stop seeing yourself as someone who earns money and start seeing yourself as someone who generates wealth. You stop seeing yourself as someone who works for others and start seeing yourself as someone who collaborates with others from a position of strength. This isn't about rejecting cooperation or becoming impossibly demanding. It's about entering every economic relationship as a peer rather than a supplicant. It's about offering value rather than hoping for opportunity. It's about creating terms rather than accepting conditions. The complete internal clarity about your economic worth isn't arrogance, it's accuracy. You know what you bring to every situation. You know what problems you solve. You know what outcomes you deliver. You know what alternatives exist if this particular arrangement doesn't serve you. This knowledge isn't theoretical, it's experiential, built through deliberate practice and conscious development. The emotional detachment necessary for strategic decision-making comes from this same clarity. When you know your worth, when you've built systems that generate value, when you've developed alternatives to any single opportunity, you can make decisions based on strategic fit rather than emotional need. You can say no to good opportunities because you're holding space for great ones. You can walk away from negotiations that don't serve you because you're not desperate for any particular outcome. This is economic self-determination, not just financial independence, but psychological independence from the need for external validation of your worth. Not just career success, but the deep satisfaction of creating value on your own terms. Not just wealth accumulation, but the internal richness that comes from knowing you've built something that reflects your true capability. You have the philosophical understanding now. You have the practical tools. The only question remaining is whether you'll use them to build the economic life you're capable of creating or continue accepting the economic life you've been conditioned to expect. The choice, as always, is yours. But now you know it's a choice.